Valorant is a game I never thought I'd play or even like, as I love games like Stardew Valley and recently Sons of the Forest, whereas Valorant is a tactical shooter. But I do love it. So much even that I went to Paris to see the annual Valorant Championship Tournament, and it was amazing. So today I'll show you how I made Agent Gekko's buddies, Wingman, Dizzy, Mosh and his ultimate Thrash, planting the spike. I started off like usual by making the base, using Super Sculpey all over and adhering it to the foil with clay glue. While that's in the background, I just want to take a minute to explain why I've been gone for so long. Between going to Paris, getting a new job, my birthday, my anniversary and a few other things behind the scenes, it's been a bit much and I've been so exhausted physically and emotionally. But now that things are slowing down a bit, I'll be able to resume sculpting and getting videos out. I'm so sorry and thank you for still being here while I've been away. It means a lot more than you know. Now that's out of the way, let me explain what I'm doing with the base. Using a ruler, I'm scoring in lines into little squares and then separating them with one of my tools. This is because I want the base to resemble one of my favourite maps, Haven, specifically A-Site, which has these stone brick sort of things on the ground. A lot of maps do have a similar vibe, but I think Haven is just super fun to play on, and I usually do quite well on that map, especially as the agent Sky, which me and one of my friends agree that if I were to be a Valorant agent, I would be Sky. And between each of the little squares, I will fill it with just a little bit of clay glue before moving on to the spike. In Valorant, there are many different game modes, but I'd say the main one is competitive. You play first to 13, 12 rounds as attacking, 12 as defending, all for your precious rank. Mine being bronze 2, which is pretty low, but you do get stuck with atrocious teammates sometimes, which I have had my fair share of. The reason I mention this is because of the spike, the main driving force of the entire game pretty much. Playing on the attack means you have a spike yourself, and your goal is to get onto a site and plant it down on the ground, giving it enough time to detonate without it being diffused, also trying to eliminate your teammates on the way. Playing on the defense means you must stop the attackers from planting by eliminating them, and if they do manage to plant, defuse it before it explodes. In most games, the spike is planted by a person on your team, unless there is a Gekko. One of his abilities, Wingman, is able to both plant and defuse the spike, hence why I'm making this piece to show off our boy Wingman and of course the others. At this point, I'm just making the base of the spike, trying to get in all of the correct shapes. It's quite difficult as it's a bit of a weird triangular thing, I guess. It just looks a bit strange. I don't really know why the spike looks the way that it does. I know that there is lore in Valorant. I don't know much of it. I know a little bit of it. Lots of the characters have strange backstories, but I love it. Another thing that really made me want to try this game, which is similar to a lot of the reason why I try games, is the art style. It's very nice. It just looks nice, and it's another reason why I usually don't play games in this sort of genre. They look like games like Counter-Strike and that kind of thing, where it's quite dark, and I don't mind that style for games. Like I said, I'm currently playing through Sons of the Forest, so dark games aren't something that I hate, but for a game like this where you're with other people, I'd rather it just be kind of a little bit more lighthearted. Makes it less stressful for me, I guess. But the reason that I love the art style is because it is very reminiscent of the show Arcane. That is because Valorant and League of Legends, what Arcane is based off of, are made by the same company, Riot Games. And I think that's great because just having a nice art style for a game, the one that Riot specifically loves to use in their games, really helps me to decide whether I like a game or not. If I don't like how a game looks, I'm probably not going to play it. And that's not talking about a graphics sense. I'm fine with games with low graphics, but having a nice art style is just a very good thing for a game to have. Again, graphics don't need to be incredibly amazing. At this point, I'm just working on Wingman, and he's quite squishy looking. He's this little yellow blob. I like to give all of his bodies names. So you have Pikachu here, you got Charmander, Squirtle, and Bulbasaur. Of course, it doesn't quite match up, but it's close enough. And on the back of Wingman, as well as Dizzy and Thrash, they have these armor plates, I guess they are. It's like these little black plates, and they are also on the arms and on Wingman's head. And the thing that I like about Wingman's design is on his head is this sort of diamond sort of shape, and it generally looks just very slightly a little bit reminiscent of how the spike looks, which I think is just kind of a small nod to what his ability can do, and I really like that. Again, Riot Games just does an amazing job with designing characters as well. Not to mention the fact that each of the agents come from very different backgrounds, which is definitely a good thing. I think having a game where each of the agents come from very different backgrounds really helps, not only to diversify the game, but also helps with the lore as well. It's not all just samey, but everyone comes from a different place, and I think that's great. The last thing that I do with Wingman before putting him to the side is just adding the little armor plates on his arms as well. I think he also has a couple on his legs, and then I move on to Dizzy. I have skipped a huge amount of the process for Dizzy, as it is very similar to Wingman. The only real difference is the fact that he's blue and just a bit differently shaped, but he also has the armor plates on his back and they look the same. I did make him quite a bit smaller than Wingman. I think the only thing that I've struggled on with this sculpture is the scaling. They're not all correct, they do look a little strange. The next one, and the fastest one, is going to be Gekko's Mosh, specifically when he is used in his ability Mosh Pit. He looks quite small right now. He will get a lot bigger once I add him to the base and add all of the goop around him, but I'm currently just working on the face, which has this sort of goggle-like thing, I guess, that's yellow that goes across his little face. I don't really know what Mosh is supposed to be. He's just a little silly guy. They're all just silly guys. But he also has this little ring on his eye, which I do use this tool just to make it easier to apply on than my fingers, as I will squish it if I use my fingers. I scrape Mosh off the acrylic pad to make room for the final one, Gekko's ultimate Thrash. I think it's supposed to be a big fish, but I could be wrong. Also, the reason I'm making Mosh and Thrash on this space is so that I can add details without squishing them or putting fingerprints in, but also so that they can be moved around easily, as they have flat bases that can be hard to pick up without squishing any of the details. Like I mentioned, in terms of scaling, Thrash should be a bit bigger than he is, but because of the size of the base and also because I didn't want it to be too big, I did have to kind of dwarf him down just a little bit, but I think it still looks generally correct, as it's bigger than Dizzy and Mosh, but sort of a more similar size to Wingman. Just like Wingman and Dizzy, Thrash has these armor plates all up his back, but they are a lot more intense as they stick up and they're a bit sharper and a bit more aggressive looking and a lot more noticeable in terms of his design. But as I mentioned, because they are standing, I do have to do them in a slightly different way to the way that I did Wingman and Dizzy's ones, by cutting out each one into the correct shape and then attaching it to the body after smoothing out each of the edges. But standing them up again still is quite difficult without using any sort of armature underneath. I probably should have at least used metal wire, but I didn't even do that. I just kind of put the clay on itself, and there were some times where I touched it and it kind of just flopped over, so I did have to make sure that that each of them are correctly secured to the back of Thrash. They are also textured on Thrash. Wingman and Dizzy, they had flatter armor plates, but Thrash's ones I did want to be a bit more textured, just to add a bit more depth to Thrash, so that he's not just kind of a bunch of flat faces, I guess. I just scrape them off the acrylic pad. Once I'm done with that, I'm finally done with all of them, and I can attach them to the base after just quickly finishing off the final touch to the base, which is just adding these little lines. I thought the base was just a little bit too bland on its own, so I wanted to add just something more after baking it. To attach Mosh, I used a mixture of Super Sculpey Firm and Liquid Super Sculpey, making it into this sticky sort of substance. Then using a silicone tool, I attached it all around Mosh as well. This is to create his Mosh Pit effect, which is this area of effect which Mosh gets thrown into, and it can hurt other enemies, potentially even killing them. And I texture it just by swirling in the silicone tool like this. Slowed it down just so you can see it a little bit better. But it creates a very lovely swirly texture, and when it comes to painting, this texture really does look nice. I then attach Thrash, and all of the other little bodies by now are baked, so I don't need to worry about smushing any of their details. I will leave Wingman till later though. We will attach Wingman afterwards, as he will be in the air floating above the spike, as that's how he plants it. When painting the base, I start off with a very nice dark grey, adding it all over, and then once that is dried I go in with a much lighter grey. This is each of these little squares can be painted lighter, separating them from the kind of between bits of each of them, and also separating them from each other. Then once those are dried as well, I will go in with a even lighter grey, almost bordering on white but not quite, and adding it just to the edges of each of these squares. This is to make them look a bit more roughed up, make them look a bit nicer, and just give them a bit more style. Also kind of, again, reaching into that style of Valorant where everything is shaded but without any sort of blending between it, just lines all kind of joined up together. I do use this very lovely small tiny little brush after using the bigger one, because I realised that the smaller one would work better, and it just works so well. I cannot stress enough, using tiny brushes like these really does make a change. It just makes it so much easier, and also it's very satisfying to paint tiny little lines with brushes like these. I got my one like this in, it wasn't a Games Workshop, but it was something similar, like a hobby shop. I found a bunch of tiny little brushes, and this is the one that I picked, and it works amazingly. You do need to make sure that you keep it nice and clean though, otherwise it can get ruined very fast. I do the same as the base with these little cubes here, painting them dark, then a lighter colour, and then on the borders an even lighter colour. When the spike is planted, it does ruin the ground a little bit like this, making it all cracked and stuff, and there's a bit of brown beneath it as that's where the dirt's coming through. So I do that, I just paint it this brown, and then once that is dried, I go in with a wet wash of an even darker brown, bordering on black, but with a bit of brown in there, just so that it seeps into all of the crevices and makes it a little bit darker. While I'm waiting for that bit to dry so that I can dry brush on top of it, I go and paint the spike, starting off with the light in the middle of it, where it's kind of blue and shining. There are a few different ways to paint light like this. The reason that I'm doing it specifically just with a paintbrush here is because I can't be asked to get my airbrush out for something as small as this. It's a lot of prep. And there are ways where you can just blend colours without using an airbrush, just kind of stippling your paintbrush and making sure that you use just a little bit of water so that the colours blend nicely. The rest of the spike is a very dark grey, almost black, not quite black, but a very dark grey all over, and then in some areas, like some of the sectioned pads on the spike, it is just a little bit of a lighter grey too. Once that's done, I start working on the bodies, specifically going straight to Dizzy. Now, before painting, Dizzy was probably my least favourite, but after painting, I can say is definitely one of my favourites because of just how cute he looks. I start off with a dark blue and then blending in some of the lighter areas like the top of the head and the arms, a lighter blue. This is just so that, Dizzy's a little bit, he's not see-through, but he's kind of jelly-like, I guess. That's a bit of a weird thing to say. And then I dry brush some purple on as well, which just makes him look a bit cold, which makes me sad. He looks so cute, I just love him. Then using this very thin paintbrush yet again, I go and add the little area to his tummy and just under his head, which is a lighter aqua sort of colour. I also use this for the section just around the eyes, and the eye itself, or eyes itself, are a very bright yellow. I also do add just a little highlight of white in there as well, but it looks mostly white on camera anyways. When it comes to each of the armor pads to each of the buddies, they are a very similar colour to the spike, almost black, but just with a hint of brown in there. Just kind of changes up the colour a little bit, makes it a little bit different, and also just because their shields do look just a bit, I guess, brown, but not really, mostly black, but just with a hint of brown, you know what I mean? A lot of blacks do have just a hint of brown in this game, which I really like. It makes the game a lot warmer. It's not just solid blacks, which is something I very much appreciate. After Dizzy's done, I start working on Thrash. He is very annoying to paint, especially without an airbrush, because you have a very harsh blend in this one between the yellow and a sort of pinkish colour, which is a very strange combination of colours to blend together. But doing it, I start off with each of the ends, starting at the yellow one end and then going to the pink on the other end, and then once I meet in the middle, I just try my best to blend it using this tiny brush and going in with each of the colours one at a time, kind of going back and forth, trying to get the colours to blend. In the end, it comes out with a orange hue in the middle. I do use some little stippling in there as well, just tiny little dots, just to make it look a bit nicer. Then right at the tip of the tail is also just a bit of purple too, which easily blends into the pink. His eye is a blinding white, shining, just like Dizzy's eyes. And Wingman as well, I guess. And then, using the same colour as I used on Dizzy, and I will use the same colour on Wingman, I paint all of his shields. I get a bit lost between using my very thin brush and the slightly thicker brush. It's quite time consuming if you use a thin brush for thicker areas like these, but also it helps to get into all of the little cracks when you have something quite textured like this. So I guess it's just kind of getting a balance between using a thin brush and a thick brush, because you don't want it to be too messy, but also it can take a lot of time if you're not using a thicker brush. But anyways, at this point the final detail is just to use a bit of dry brushing with the thicker brush, just so that there's a bit of extra colour on the Thrash. Then I finally paint Mosh, starting with a very dark green like this, but that won't really be showing through as much in the end. I do need to be quite delicate in the edges where Mosh meets the ground, as I don't really want it to overlap with any of the base that I've already done, which is why I go in with a very tiny brush, this lovely one that I love, just to get in those little edges. Then, once that's dried, I go in with a much lighter, almost lime-ish sort of green, and do it specifically around the middle where his face is, blending it out towards the edges so that the edges are the only parts which are that dark green. Once I've done that, I then go in with an even lighter green, which is bordering on yellow, but just still quite a light green. And with the very tiny brush, I go and paint right on top of each of these swirls. This really highlights this texture that I did earlier with the liquid clay mixed with clay. It really brings it out, and I think it just looks so nice. Even though this isn't exactly what Mosh looks like in the game when he's on the ground, there's pretty much just a bunch of little Mosh heads. It's kind of creepy, honestly. I think this definitely works for Mosh. Now I'll quickly show you, when doing something like this with this tiny brush, I do use my hand as a paint palette sometimes, just because it's so much easier. My hand's right there, my paint palette's all the other way, on the kind of behind my camera and stuff, and it's quite hard to reach. So using your hand can be quite easy, especially when you're using a very tiny paintbrush like this. Once I've painted his face yellow, I go in with even lighter yellow, just adding little well, they're supposed to be little triangles, but it looks more like little dots. Then I go back with that lighter green, painting around the eyes, and then on top of that, the ring that I added is blue. I will definitely be using the mix of liquid clay and regular clay in the future to make the swirly pattern. It came out so much better than I thought it would. When it comes to Wingman, I started off with yellow, but then quickly realised that I hated how much the grey underneath seeped through. When using yellow, you need to be careful. Yellow is one of the worst colours when it comes to that. So I decided to quickly add a white base coat to the whole of Wingman, except for like his armour and shields, because that would be painted black, so it doesn't really matter. And look at the difference when I added the yellow on top. It looks so much better. I still had to do a couple of coats just because it wasn't perfectly flat all over, but it made such an amazing difference. When it comes to using light colours, prepping underneath is so important, and I don't do it nearly enough. I should, but it's just quite annoying. It takes a lot of time and also can make it quite chunky if you don't thin out the base colour enough. Then using a sponge, I do just quickly lighten up all of the edges and certain faces around Wingman. Then going in with a tiny brush, I paint purple around the eyes. This is his sort of like little face detail that I didn't actually put on with clay, but I instead did want to paint it specifically as I thought it would look quite nice, and I think at least I was correct about that. After I've done that, I then go in and just dry brush a bit more of that purple under the arms where it's supposed to be, and then I start working on the shields all across. I do use my very tiny paintbrush for this bit just because I don't want to mess up at all, and it's very easy, especially when you screw up with black on top of yellow for the whole colour just to get messed up. You cannot get rid of it and it's so tedious, so I need to be super careful. The combination of a flat surface and using a very thin brush to paint flat details is incredibly satisfying. I don't do it a lot in my sculptures because I like texture, but I have to say doing this is incredibly satisfying, especially to watch as well, just seeing those lines, and they're just so neat and nice, and I'm not quite used to doing things too neatly. I like to go a bit crazy when it comes to detail because I like to have texture all over, but because, you know, I can't really do that with this unless I'm trying to make like hyper realistic and weird. Yeah, I had to use a flat surface and paint on top of it. Again, another reason why this tiny paintbrush is super useful. I then just paint his eyes, which are pretty much just flat white all over, nothing much else to it. Then once that's done, I attach him to the base using some super glue, some very sticky super glue, and I attach him to the spike. This is because, again, like I said, Wingman does plant the spike, so I wanted him to be floating in the air. The final touch is to gloss each of them. I do avoid glossing the shields on them, but I do want to make sure that Mosh and even the light parts of the spike get glossed, and I think it just looks so nice. They look so shiny, especially in the light, and in the end I think this is definitely a good final detail. I was considering using like resin for it, but I thought it would be a little bit too messy, and just gloss works good enough. There's no real reason for me to do resin instead. And with that, our diorama of Gekko's bodies, Wingman, Mosh, Dizzy and Thrash is complete. As someone who plays Sky very often and not Gekko, I was going to make her abilities, but Gekko's little guys will always be very popular in the community, no doubt, so I decided to make them instead. Let me know what you think, and if you play Valorant, what's your rank? Probably better than my bronze 2, that's for sure. If you enjoyed this video, a like and subscribe would be greatly appreciated. It helps out and makes it easier for me to get more videos out in the long run. I always appreciate every one of you, and yet again I'm sorry for having been gone for so long. So, as a thank you for watching until the end and still being here, I have a little treat. Keep watching and you'll see some clips of me and my friends. Until next time everyone, ta-ta! Oh!
Nice, nice. Go on, ace, gate. You can ace.
I can't ace.
You can, you've got 3.
Yeah!
No!
Nice. Step it, yeah. No, ace.
Oh, nice.
Last player
Oh.
standing.
Oh.
I
smoke.
I don't know
Arthur
how that
Morgan.
happened. Oh no, that's not my
Oh.
Why?
I was talking.
Remaining.
No.
Last player standing.
Don't shoot fucking Vader. What are you doing?
Sorry, I'm sorry! Ah!
Wait, guys, watch this.
Watch, George.
Hey, watch this.
Watch out! I'm
You
sorry.
fucking jump.
Race,
Did you have the spike?
Spike carrier killed. I have the spike.
Sorry.
What do you smoke?